Hey listeners, it's your host, Sarah Hall. Thanks for listening to Peoria Theater People, a podcast where I shine a spotlight on the extraordinary stories of local artists in the central Illinois area. Thanks so much for tuning in to my first episode of Peoria Theater People. I'm so excited to have you listening to this podcast. This podcast was a passion project that I decided to start this year. I got inspired because I was listening to podcasts like Theater People and Little Known Facts, which are a couple podcasts that you can listen to and hear interviews from some of your favorite Broadway performers. And I was listening to them and I was just kind of thinking, why don't we have something like that where we can have local theater people be interviewed in the Peoria area? I've grown up doing theater in Peoria since I was about 9, and I've met so many people who are just extraordinary and so talented. And I think our community theater in this area is so rich. And so that's why I decided that I was going to start my own podcast where I interviewed those people. So I'm so excited to share my first conversation with you. This is a conversation with Willis Barber, who's a close friend of mine. We actually went to high school together, as you'll probably hear in the podcast. And then he went off to college and I went off to college. And then we kind of reconnected by doing the Community Children's Theater Board together. And so we've had some experiences doing theater, and Willis is just such a light. And it's been really fun to work with him the past couple of years with Community Children's Theater. And so I can't wait to share this conversation with you. And I also wanted to mention before you go ahead and listen to this interview that this was recorded at a time where we were going ahead with a production of Big Fish. We were planning on live streaming it in December 2020, and we were in the middle of rehearsals, and we were hoping that everything was going to go well. And it turns out that due to recent mitigations that are increased in Illinois due to COVID-19, we have decided to postpone our production until summer 2021 at this point. So we're hoping to do Big Fish in July. But we felt like the recent mitigations that have been increased just didn't make it safe enough for us to go ahead with the production. So I just wanted to let you all know that that's kind of what ended up happening. So if you hear us talk about Big Fish, you kind of know that going into it. And you know, all theaters are struggling right now, so check on your theater friends, check on your theaters and see how you can support them. And to support Community Children's Theater, which is an organization so near and dear to my heart, as you'll hear me talk about, I'm sure, throughout this podcast, please visit us at cctpeoria.org and follow us on Instagram at cctpeoria, and also like us on Facebook to get info on our upcoming productions and figure out how to support us and ways that you can donate. So thank you so much, and here's my conversation with Willis. Willis Barber, welcome to the podcast.
Hey.
I'm so happy to have you on Peoria Theater People, and you are the first guest.
I'm so happy to be here too. This is so cool. It is so cool.
This is so great. And I also really just want to thank you. And I want to start out by thanking you because you have been there from the very beginning, from the second this was an idea for me. You have been like, you go, Sarah, you do this. You've been just a big supporter. So I want to thank you.
Oh, well, you're welcome. You know, as somebody who listens to a lot of podcasts, this is just I think it's just really exciting that somebody here locally is doing a podcast and featuring people like ourselves who are, you know, part of this community theater world that we are all, you know, we all love it so much. And I just think it's really great that you want to shed a light on that.
Thank you. And that is really the goal of the podcast, is to really shine lights on people's stories. And we're going to get your story today and kind of talk about some of your background. But just a little bit of background about you that I want to kind of start out by talking about is we go way back. I think we've known each other for 13 years at this point.
Something like that, yeah.
Something like that. So we went to high school together for a year. We were at Richwoods together. Go Knights. You were a senior my freshman year. And even before that, you grew up in Peoria a little bit, and you can talk about that for sure. But after you left Richwoods, you go to Huntington for a couple years, and you go to college, and you get an education degree. You end up teaching in Indiana, and then you end up coming back to teach in Illinois. And then we reconnected by doing Hunchback of Notre Dame in 2018 at Peoria Players Theater. And then since then, we've been on the CCT board together. We've done some other shows together. So we're going to talk about all of those things. That's kind of our history and our connection, which is really cool. So that really made me excited to have you be the first guest, because I know a lot about your story, but I'm hoping to uncover some things that maybe
We'll see. There might be a few secrets there you don't know that I can share today with everybody.
I'm so stoked. And then for a fun fact about you, for anyone that doesn't know you or has not really met you or worked with you, is that you are a huge Survivor fan.
That's right.
And I blame you for getting me into the Survivor fandom.
Hey, there shouldn't be blame. You should be thanking me for getting you into it, not blaming me, right?
Yes, you're so right. You're so right. No, the Survivor fandom, I am fully in it now. I am fully a fan, and I have come so far in knowing how tribals work and how the game works. And
for those of you listening that have never watched a season of Survivor, I recommend you start with season 33. That's where Sarah got her start, and then just, connect with me and I'll tell you where to go from there. But it's one of my favorite television shows, and it's maybe a little known fact, but I feel like I don't hide that from people. So
no, you don't.
I mean, I feel like people know that about me. But yeah, it's just one of my favorite shows, and so I'm so glad that you got started on it if it weren't for the coronavirus, would you have? I don't know.
That's a really great question.
That's one good thing out of 2020, right?
It is one good thing out of 2020, and it's one great thing. I feel like you can't come on the podcast without talking about Survivor.
That's right.
It has to come up at some point.
Actually, for the listeners out there, before we hit record, I said, Survivor's ready.
He totally did. He totally started out the podcast that way. Got us in the mindset.
That's right.
And then the other fun fact that I think we should mention is probably going to come up later at some point too, but you are a huge Hamilton fan, and you actually got a chance to see the original Broadway cast in New York.
I did.
Which anyone who knows you and talks to you is probably going to know that at some point.
It's also something I don't hide,
It's something you do not hide. No. So that's kind of, I think, some fun facts about you, and gives people an insight a little bit into who you are.
Well, thank you.
But the first thing that I really want to start talking about, and I'm going to start out the interviews with all my guests this way, is I want to talk about your background and sort of how you got your start in Peoria theater. And I know in this community, we definitely do amateur theater. It's not professional, but I think there's a lot of heart and soul that goes into Peoria theater. And I think we all have our start somehow and break into it, so to speak. So talk to me about kind of your childhood and how you got interested in doing theater, why you started doing it, and when did you start performing?
Okay, well, I think like most people that do theater, I kind of knew from a young age that it was an interest of mine, partly thanks to a lot of movie musicals. I grew up in a family where I didn't have anybody in my family that did theater or was any sort of performer. My dad has a good singing voice. His father had a good singing voice, But as far as like acting and doing theater and things, I didn't have anybody in my family who showed me the way, so to speak. So it's something that I was definitely interested in from a very young age. And I would go around the house pretending to be the characters of The Wizard of Oz and, singing the songs from Aladdin and Beauty and the Beast and, all those great Disney movies that came out, when I was a young child. And, I wore the VHS tapes. I just wore those things out because I was such a fan. And so I always kind of knew from a young age that I had this interest in musicals and musical theater. I didn't necessarily know it was musical theater when I was a kid, until I got to elementary school. And this is where I have to give a lot of credit to Lisa Voiles. Those of you who are listening maybe know who Lisa Voiles is. She was my third grade teacher. And she did a drama club at Woodrow Wilson Primary School where I attended. And so in my third grade year, I was old enough to finally join the drama club. And we did The Wizard of Oz, which was, as I've already mentioned, a favorite of mine. And I got to play the wizard and just, had a lot of good memories being in that. It was probably like a 30-minute production of The Wizard of Oz. It was not the full thing, But as a kid, that was my first kind of theatrical experience, so to speak. And it was at elementary school. So, zero budget, kind of thing. But it was my first chance to perform on stage, and to get that sort of like mentorship and encouragement from Lisa really meant a lot to me. And I'm sure I'll bring her up again later in the podcast, just because she's been such an influence on my life in theater.
I think something you touched on as you sort of talked about your experience growing up is the importance of mentorship, and I think also the importance of feeling like you belong. And I really loved listening to you talk about that, because I think when you're a kid and you're trying to find your way in the world and you're trying to find where you fit in and where you belong, you have those mentors and friends that push you to sort of, I don't know, get involved in these spaces where you kind of find your niche. And it seems like theater was that for you.
Yeah, exactly. I think that a lot of my growing up and my experiences really with theater influenced who I am, I think, as an adult. I feel like I didn't know coming into this today I was going to say Lisa Voiles' name so much, but I ended up really kind of following Lisa Voiles' footsteps in a lot of ways, and not intentionally. Like, I didn't go to college thinking, oh, I'm going to be Lisa Voiles, but I went to college and, ended up finding my passion for elementary education and becoming an elementary school teacher. And I found my way back to Peoria, teaching in the same school that Lisa Voiles taught in the classroom next door to Lisa Voiles. And, and then I think when that happened for me and I was teaching next to her and realizing that how her influence early on in my life had kind of, in a way, led me to where I was as an adult. I became so grateful to that, and I wanted to make sure she knew that, and I wanted to then, be that for somebody else, and I think that that's where my involvement with community children's theater as an adult has come from. For those who don't know, I'm a board member for community children's theater. And I'm actually the president of the board now. And I got involved with that in late 2013, early 2014. I think my first official board meeting was February of 2014. So I've been involved in it for, I don't know, what's that, 6.5 years now? And it feels like a lot longer, but but anyway, so that's kind of where it came from for me, was realizing the influence that Lisa had on me as a kid, and helping me find my way and finding a place for me where I felt belonging and I felt like my passions were, complemented by others, and that I was able to learn and grow and things like that.
And I think that's just it. I think you learned and you grew throughout doing theater as a kid while you were growing up. So I want to talk about that, and I want to talk about the sort of impact that you felt theater had on you growing up. And you've started to speak to this a little bit, and we're definitely going to get into community children's theater. So Don't think I don't have plans to talk about that, because I love that organization. I know you live and breathe it constantly in your life. But talk to me about that impact that theater had on you, being able to learn and grow as a person.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, theater really, really impacted me in so many ways that I'm not sure even now that I can actually articulate. You know what I mean? I think that I'm finding more and more that my ability to empathize with other people comes from, I think, my love for theater and the stories that people tell through musicals and through plays and through a lot of forms of entertainment. I watch Netflix just as much as anybody else, right? And and listening to podcasts as well, because I'm getting into that as well too. And so it's like I feel like because of the stories that I hear and that I've learned from being maybe meeting other people doing shows, and then also the stories being told on stage, have, I think, really helped me understand other people than myself, and really helped me learn to empathize with other people. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes so much sense.
That's one thing that I think I really have taken away from theater. That I don't know that, I mean, I didn't grow up doing sports or things like that, so I don't know, I can't speak to that, but I know that that's something that theater has brought for me, meeting people from all different walks of life who are different than me, and then putting together this piece of art, this piece, whatever it is, and then being able to also tell a story and share somebody else's story that they've written, or, maybe it's based on something true, maybe it's not. And, theater has a lot of different purposes, and so maybe it's a serious show that's meant to tell a really prolific story, or maybe it's just something really lighthearted and fun, or something kind of mixed in between,
I think that's why I'm missing live theater right now, is just in the middle of COVID-19 and the pandemic, we're trying to figure out ways to bring live theater back, but there's just something about the magic of being in the audience or being a part of storytelling and impacting the audience and making them feel something. And I think that comes from empathy. And I think theater is really able to teach empathy. So I'm so glad you brought that up. And I think we have a unique way of learning about other people's perspectives and valuing people through putting ourselves in another character or, even directing, which we're going to talk about your directing experience too coming up. But I think that's something that I think really speaks to how theater's impacted you. I can definitely see how that's had an effect on your life. And I want to talk about all of your theater experiences, but I'm sure we could probably spend hours upon hours talking about all of them.
Nobody wants to sit and listen to us for that long, Sarah.
Hey, why not? I think hopefully they're enjoying it right now, right? Oh gosh, there's so much I want to talk about. I love this. I think this is really speaking to the value and importance of theater. Do you have any favorite theater experiences just generally that you've had? I want to jump into Charlie Brown a little bit because I imagine that that's one for you, but do you have any just favorites?
I'll end with Charlie Brown, but I will tell you, when I first have that question given to me by anybody and say, what's your favorite show you've been part of? It's really hard to choose. I mean, I've been a part of so many different shows and in so many different ways that it's really hard to choose. But one that really stands out to me was when I was in Hairspray at Cornstalk. I was in Hairspray at Cornstalk. Peoria directed it. Hopefully all these listeners saw it. It was sold out every night. I think we did a couple holdovers. If you didn't see it, I'm so sorry. But it was just, for me, it was a really magical experience being in that cast. And it was the first time I was in a show that I really actively was trying to challenge myself because I had done a lot of shows up to that point, but I was cast in a role that I did not see myself in. I was one of the Corny Collins dancers, and just that word dancer to me was like, oh, I'm not a dancer. Like, anybody who knows me knows I'm a little bit chunky, and I don't exactly look like a dancer, you know what I mean? And so I kind of always had I always felt like I could learn choreography if it was taught to me, but I never felt like I would a dancer. And so when I was cast in the role as a Corny Collins teen dancer at the age of 23, I was a teenager dancer, but anyway, whatever, that's theater. And so, but when I was cast as a dancer, I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to take this challenge on, and I'm going to be a dancer with all these other people who maybe have more training and experience than I have. And I think there were several of us that were in that role. I think there was probably, 6 or 7 couples. We each had a partner and whatnot. And I think that I really pushed myself that summer because Corny Collins dancers are in a lot of the show. For those of you who don't know Hairspray, I was in like every other scene, and so I had to learn a lot of choreography, and I really, really pushed myself that summer. And so because of that, and just the story of Hairspray and what it tells about, social justice and things like that. And, we can get into that, but just the story means a lot to me of Hairspray. But then also personally, on a personal level, I was really proud of that show because of the hard work that I put into it. And when I watch the DVD, which I still do, I pull it out every year, at least once a year, and I watch it, and I'm just to remind myself of the hard work I put in that summer and the things I was proud of, and the story that we told that summer. And I think that I think it's an important story.
And what year was that?
That was 2012.
So it's been, oh my gosh, 8 years already. That's crazy.
Yeah.
I did see that production, and I hear you talk about it now, and it's just a really great example, I think, of how theater can challenge you. And this is an example of you growing too as a person. And I think the beauty of community theater is sometimes you do get opportunities like that you may not see yourself in. Yeah. But it challenges you. It reminds me of when I was in Footloose back in, I think, 2010 at the Tent. And we had to run every rehearsal before we started because it was such a dance-heavy show, and we had to sing while we danced. And so we had to be, it was pretty athletic, and I'm not necessarily the most athletic person either. So that was really major, and that's what Hairspray makes me think of.
Yeah. So definitely, it pushed me quite a bit. And so it's something I'm really proud of. And also it was another one of those ones where it was just an important story to be told, and so that's why it's really important to me. And we just recently did Hairspray for Community Children's Theater in 2019, and I just feel like that's a story that it was relevant in 2012. It's relevant in 2019. It's even it's a very relevant story. Just about for those of you who don't know Hairspray, I mean, I can't imagine anybody doesn't, but if you don't know Hairspray, it tells the story of both a chubby white girl teen who wants to be on a dancing show, and she's kind of, told that she can't participate because of the way she looks. She ends up getting on the show, but then she also wants to bring all of her black friends on the show with her. And so there's just a major component of the show it's set in the 1960s during the Civil Rights Movement, and a major point in the show is trying to integrate the television dancing show that Tracy auditions for. And so it just tells a really important story for me. And so that theater experience, being in Hairspray, stands out as a favorite of mine. And I just love it. And I would do it again in a heartbeat. But at the same time, I don't want to redo something like that because it was so special,
I totally have those experiences, and I totally relate, where you have that special production and you can't do it again because your experience with it was so unique and special at the time that you just don't want to touch it. Right. But I'm glad you got to be involved with CCT, and I think doing that production was so important for us.
Yeah. And so being involved in Hairspray a second time in a different role, as president of an organization, and, us doing that, we were trying to take a stand for things and just say, this is something we believe in and this is a message we want to tell. And I think being told by children, doing it with a cast of ages 8 to 18, I think, it sends a very powerful message. And so that's something that, when Brian Blanks, the director, proposed it to us as a board, I think immediately we were like, yeah, we want to get on this. This is something we feel is important, and for those of you who know CCT, we don't typically do shows like that. We like, we're a children's theater, so we want to introduce kids to theater. And so we don't always do shows that have such a message as Hairspray has, but we have, in the 6.5 years I've been on the board, we've had 2 instances I can think of. First being, well, we just mentioned Hairspray, but then thinking back to 2014 when we did Ragtime School Edition, and there was a lot of people in the community that were saying, community children's theater shouldn't be doing a show like Ragtime. And for those of you who don't know Ragtime, it's a show that kind of centers on 3 different cultures in the turn of the century, 1900s, and there's a white culture, an immigrant culture, and a black culture, and it kind of tells a story about how it's a story that kind of interweaves all 3 of those cultures and whatnot, and so it just kind of challenges some of the things that were believed by those different cultures, and so anyways, it's an important musical and it's an important story to me. And so we did that back in 2014, and we had a lot of people in the community who said, you guys should not be doing a show like that. It used racial slurs, and we did not take those out because we felt like that was a huge important part of the education. And that feeds back to our mission of CCT to educate kids, and not only in theater, but we wanted to educate them on, important issues as well, and historical issues. And so for us, we didn't really want to take those racial slurs out. We wanted to make sure that they were used and that the actors on stage knew the context of them and learned something from them. And I think that Brian Blanks just did a fantastic job. I sat in some of those rehearsals, and just the way that he taught it to the kids and helped the kids understand the historical issues behind it. And I was really, really proud of that production. We had some of those people who were kind of against us in the community came and saw the production and came to us later and said, I'm so glad that you guys did this, and I'm so glad that you guys took time and did a show that was maybe a little bit riskier, because it's not when you do Ragtime, it's not a guaranteed moneymaker, as like if you do a Disney show that it still is not necessarily a guaranteed moneymaker, but with the Disney show that people are very familiar with it. You might draw in some people who don't normally come to shows, but with Ragtime being something that's a little bit lesser known, we were taking a huge gamble. We're a nonprofit organization at CCT, so we're not really trying to make money, but still it's expense to put a program on. And so we wanted to make sure that even though it was maybe a little riskier for us, that we wanted to do it because it was important. And so we did that in 2014. We did Hairspray in 2019, and I think that we want to continue as CCT to take time to do shows like that in between some of the other Disney shows, which, you can't, if as a kid, you don't always, or even as an adult, I don't always want to be in a real heavy show, I only want to do Les Mis every now and then, you know what I mean? It's a really heavy, important show, shows like Les Mis and Hunchback, and I've been in some of those shows, but every now and then you want to do a fun show too, that kind of, brings back to like, you and I did Charlie Brown this year. And
100%. And I love that we started talking about some of your favorite theater experiences, and it naturally went into CCT experiences, because I think that so speaks to who you are and the kind of what you're about when it comes to theater, not even just performing, but making sure that these kids who are getting started in the theater community, who are between the ages of 8 to 18, get this education about issues that are especially so relevant today with all the social justice movements that are happening, the Black Lives Matter movement. It's so critical that I think we pick shows from time to time and we work them in that really educate these kids about the history of these movements. And I think that's a really beautiful thing about that theater can do, is teach people about that history. And I remember I wasn't a board member when we did Ragtime, but I was a board member when we were deciding whether or not to do Hairspray. And I was really excited at the prospect and opportunity. And I think what mattered to us as a board, and what matters when Brian came in and directed both of those shows for us, actually, is that he really cares about the educational component with the kids. And it really does speak to our mission of educating kids about how historical movements have gone.
Yeah, and that's something, regardless of the show, when we're looking for volunteers to work in our organization of any sort, it comes back to the educational component. We're not just we're not just a factory trying to produce shows here. You know what I mean? We really are. I believe that we really we care about the kids. We really care about them having opportunity where they feel safe and comfortable to learn and grow, and to get to, share some of their talents and to challenge themselves in a lot of different ways. And so that's, I could talk about CCT for hours, as you girls can tell. But, that's really what it comes down to is, when we're picking our shows and we're picking the people that we want to be involved in our organization, we're looking for people who want to encourage and help nourish that interest in theater. And if we can educate them in other ways outside of theater too, that's just an added bonus for us.
And since we're talking about community children's theater, I do want to talk about what made you want to join the board, and what has your experience on the board been like. So talk to me about when you were deciding, you came back to Illinois, you start teaching at formerly Woodrow Wilson, now Maude Sanders.
Yeah.
I think you're teaching third grade at the time.
I taught third grade.
Yes.
Right next door to Lisa Voiles. And she was in the third grade classroom next to me. I was in, and she was, I think, president of the board at the time of CCT.
So is that part of knowing her and your past experience growing up as a CCT kid? Is that kind of what inspired you to join the board?
It definitely is. So she would talk about CCT all the time. We had the same lunch hour together. So, she was talking about CCT, and I think they were doing the production of Tarzan at the time, and so she was talking a lot about different things, and I said to her, I'm like, well, how do I get involved? Or I don't know if it was me that brought it up or her that brought it up first, but she was like, well, we have an opening, and so I wrote a little letter saying why I thought I would be great for joining the board, and I know that they reviewed it and obviously let me in, but so it really just came I was looking for a way to, I think, be involved in theater. I knew being in the profession I'm in, during the school year, those of you who don't know, teachers work a lot. And so, we get summers off, but we work a lot during the school year. And so I knew that I had limited amount of times to be in a show myself. And so I wanted something where I could feel like I was involved in theater. And then I have other passions, obviously, for education and for working with children. And so it just seemed like the right fit. And giving back to the organization that really gave me a good start it just kind of all came full circle for me. And so that's just kind of how I got involved in CCT. And yeah.
And you've worked your way up to being president
I've worked
now,
my way
which
to
is
the top.
So exciting.
Somebody try and challenge me now. No, just kidding.
So I currently serve as secretary with you. And I just, again, really want to reiterate to listeners how much you live and breathe CCT in your everyday life. I think if you're not doing school stuff, if you're not taking a break to relax, which I think you hardly ever do, you're always
I have this year in 2020.
Well, in the middle of a pandemic, that makes it a little easier to do that. But I think you just have such a love and heart for this organization that goes above and beyond. And I think your experience on the board has been really positive for you, it seems like, mostly.
Yeah.
And talk about just generally your experience on the board a little bit.
Well, for me, I don't even know where to begin. But, for me, I think anything in life that I find that I'm really passionate about, I just go like full in, you know what I mean? There's nothing that I kind of sort of like, you know what I mean? I'm either like, I love it or I just don't want anything to do with it, you know? And so I think for me, I got involved on the board, and, you know, after my first year of being on the board, where I kind of just got to know what CCT was, you know, being on the other side of CCT was a little bit weird because hadn't been that many years since I'd been in a CCT show as a kid. And so, you know, getting involved in the board and just kind of see how it works, I became more passionate about what the board does. And so because I really believe in the mission of CCT, it's just something that I just found myself little by little just becoming more and more and more involved in, and to the point where sometimes I'm like, okay, I have to start saying no to things because I can't do it all, you know. And but I think it's just something that I really believe in the mission of CCT, and I really love what CCT does. I'm so grateful for what it did for me as a kid, and I think that if I can in any sort of way help other kids have that same experience that I had, that's why I do it. And so, I mean, as far as why I do so much, I don't know. I mean, I think it's just something I'm kind of a nerd about a lot of stuff. And so like CCT is like my thing I like to nerd out on. You know, I just love to, let's see how I can, you know, like come up with this fundraiser, or how can we do that? Or, you know, I mean, just like stuff like that. It's just something that's really fun for me and something that I'm really passionate about.
And I think what's so amazing, not just with even you, but with all the guests that I hope to have come on the podcast, I think what speaks to our connection to this Peoria theater community is that with something like CCT, being president, being involved in a show, directing, generally you don't get paid, and if you do get paid anything, it's not very much for the hours that you put in. We're not really doing it for the money, which is why it blows me away. I think the commitment and level of commitment that people in this community put into organizations like CCT, Cornstalk, Peoria Players, Eastlight, all of the organizations we have in our area. So I think that's really wonderful, and I think that's why it really blows me away.
Well, and I think that too, you know, I mean, like you said, you know, I'm not the only one in this community that just like gives hours and hours to a nonprofit organization that does theater. Like there are lots of us out there, you know, and I don't want to start mentioning names because I'm going to not include people, you know what I mean? But right. I know that, and over the course of this podcast, I'm sure many of them will be on here, but you know, I think that that's the thing is, you know, being a nonprofit or arts organization, you know, it takes the volunteer hours to make the organization run. You know, if somebody's not doing it, it's not getting done. You know what I mean? Because right. There's nobody gets paid at CCT except for we pay our directors, our choreographers, our music directors, and by paying them, I mean like we don't give them enough to cover their gas money driving to rehearsals. You know what I mean? And so it's like barely what I would call payment. You know what I mean? Right, exactly. And so it's like if it's not being done by these volunteers, it's not going to be done. And so I think that that's just kind of the nature of what we do.
And so you mentioned before that you had to start learning how to say no to some of these experiences that were potential for you, and then talking about, you know, how you put in these hours and hours and you have to kind of decide when you want to make those commitments. So that is something I wanted to talk about, because I know you really do a nice job, I think, a lot of times at picking certain shows that you want to direct and certain opportunities you want to take advantage of. And by that, I mean just pour your heart and soul into it because it matters to you. Mm-hmm. And so how do you go through that decision-making process? Like you have a show come up and you know the season announcements for the theaters for the next year. What makes you say, oh, I want to do that show, or, oh, I want to take, you know, I want to pour my heart into this opportunity?
Yeah, for me, I guess it's different every time. I don't know. But, you know, I think that when I was a kid, I just wanted to do everything, and I didn't really care what it was. You know, I can remember a time when I was in high school, and I think I was in like 4 different shows at the same time. And I just didn't know any better. But I think that for me, like, you know, as an adult, being somebody who has a full-time career, you know, I only have so much time to commit to my hobbies, and you know, theater is a hobby for me. You know, it's not something I ever get paid for, and so I have to decide, you know, with the time that I have, how do I want to spend it? And so that's kind of where it all comes down to. I only have so much time. You know, I put a lot of volunteer hours in at my church as well. So I would be, if I didn't mention some of my experiences at my church, you know, so it's like those are priorities for me. And then with the time that I have left, how do I want to spend it. And so, there's a lot of theater opportunities out there, and there are some that I really want to do and some I just can't do because of commitments to others. And so it's just kind of, it's not a really easy question to answer, Sarah, because it's different, and sometimes there's that unique show that comes along that it's like, okay, I've got to change my schedule so I can be part of this show because, and I think, Your Good Man, Charlie Brown was one of those shows for me.
I was going to say, I want to get into this next. This is a perfect segue.
It really is.
Because I think you saw the opportunity and you really made an effort at that point. You were like, I'm going to do this show. And you even said to me multiple times throughout, the fall leading up to that, and even probably the summer leading up to our start of production, you were like, Sarah, you have to come audition for this with me. And I was kind of skeptical and on the fence, I will say, and be honest. I was trying to decide what show I wanted to do. And you really, really convinced me to come out for Charlie Brown. And at that time, we were doing Frozen for CCT. Were we doing that?
We were, but
at that point, wow, that seems like forever ago.
When I very first heard that Metamora Thespian Society was doing Your Good Man, Charlie Brown, and that it was going to be directed by my friend Lisa White, and
shout out to Lisa.
I love Lisa. I think anybody who knows Lisa probably loves her. She's great. And so when I knew that they were doing that, it's been a dream role of mine for a long time. I can remember sitting in my college dorm and listening to the 1999 Broadway recording of Charlie Brown, and I think a friend had given me a CD of it, and so I was listening to it in my college dorm, and I remember listening to it and just loving the songs and the characters. I was never like a Peanuts fan growing up. I mean, even to this day, I can't really tell you how many Peanuts comics I've read or any of the TV shows or anything like that. I was never really a fan, but the musical, just something about it, the songs and the happy, like it was just such a feel-good show. And so for me, I just knew that was a character that I could really relate to, being Charlie Brown, just being your average, normal guy. I feel like I relate to that in a lot of ways. And so it doesn't hurt that I resemble him a little bit too. But but it's just like, it's been a dream role of mine really since college. And, it's not a show that's done a lot. And so when I heard that it was coming, that they were doing it, I was like, okay, when is it? When are auditions? I have to do this. It's just something I would really regret if I didn't at least give it a shot,
Well, I just have to say that I think seeing you in that role was transformative and so special and magical, because I think that is a rare opportunity that we get in theater sometimes to really embody this role that you're just perfect for. Like, I don't have any other way to explain it, is that you were Charlie Brown. There was no other option, I don't think, at the time. And I think I disagree.
I think a lot of people could have played the role better than I did, Sarah. But, I think that
having been your Sally, you will always be my Charlie.
Oh, thanks.
But I do have to tell the story. One time, I think, because I think this speaks to how much you embodied Charlie Brown, is that we were, I don't know if you remember this, but we were, I think, waiting for a performance, and we were downstairs in Metamora Fields, and you were just laying on these chairs, just waiting for us to go upstairs. And we kind of just like, how you doing, Willis? You doing okay? And you're like, oh, I'm fine, I guess. And it was just such a Charlie Brown moment.
I do kind of remember that, but I was just, when you do a performance, for those of you who've been in a show, like, you need all that energy on stage. I think I was probably a moment where I was like, I just need to like lay down and relax. And, and back to what I was mentioning, I don't do a lot of shows during the school year for that reason, because, Charlie Brown performed in February. So, this was before the world shut down, and I was still teaching all day. And, and so it's like, I don't remember the specific day that happened, but I probably was just like, okay, I need to conserve some energy here, because I'm going to go be on stage for the next couple hours. And, none of us had a break much in that show.
That's so true.
There was just a handful of characters in that show, and we were all pretty much on all the time. And so it was, so I mean, for me, like, that's probably what it was. But I think that was a Charlie Brown thing to do. Like, oh, I'm okay.
Yes, it totally was. And you worked so hard on that role. And also, shout out to our amazing cast and production team, especially, I mean, we already shouted out Lisa, but shout out to Maggie and Molly and
Kurt
and Brooke and Joel and Ryan. And I mean, everyone involved in this production was just incredible.
Yeah.
And I think we all embodied our characters, I like to think, very
and David,
well.
don't forget David. Linus.
Yes. Oh, 100%. David was the perfect Linus. David worked so hard on the tapping, and I hope to have...
Oh, now we just got everybody.
See,
you guys, we can talk about... That's any show, though. Like, any show that you do, there are so many people that put a show together that you don't know as an audience member. Whether it's something you see professionally done or you see something at a community, there are so many people that go behind the scenes that you don't even necessarily know that help make something happen.
And I think I want to hopefully have all of our Charlie Brown production team and cast on the podcast. But I wanted to talk about the experience for you because I just think it was one of the highlights of your theater life.
It definitely is. I mentioned Hairspray earlier, but really for me, Charlie Brown is. It was the first time I've ever had a lead role. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I really am not the type of person that like I do a show and I have to have a lead role. That's never been me.
Right.
And so it's like I love to be in the ensemble of a show because I love storytelling, and I feel like the ensemble is such a huge part of storytelling.
100%.
Now that doesn't mean I don't have some dream roles out there. I do have some roles I would love to play, but for me, it was like Charlie Brown was my first time that I got to, really be front and center and share this, have the stage be mine. And so it was such an opportunity for me that I wanted to make sure that I really put a lot of work into it. And I believe that I did, because I just wanted to make sure that I didn't let anybody else down. And I wanted to make sure that I challenged myself and felt good about the production. And ultimately, I feel like I did.
I think it was just one of those special, rare experiences for us, for both of us, but especially
and I
for
feel
you.
like that show is like that, knowing other people who have done that show.
Yes.
And I feel like when people do that show, specifically Charlie Brown, it just kind of connects you because it is a small cast.
It is.
And it's, there's not a lot of like special effects to it. It's a very simple show in a lot of ways, but it's also very meaningful. And I think that when you do a show, a cast has to bond like in a way that we did, because it's just, because of the nature of it, when you have a show where you've only got 6 or 7,
right.
I don't know how many of us there were. I can't count off the top of my head, but, there were only a handful of us that were in that show because it's just a small show. And so we really bonded. And I think it's just a special experience for us.
100%. And I think what's special about that show is it is one of those shows that brings joy and is more lighthearted and has this kind of series of vignettes that are a little bit more comical. Obviously, they're based off the wonderful comic by Charles Schulz, but it's not one of those shows necessarily that is heavier, but it still gives you some profound, I think, messages about life. So I think that's one of the examples.
And I think that the audience can so relate to every character,
yes.
And it's one of those shows where you can see yourself in Charlie, you can see yourself in Sally, and even in Snoopy, like everybody's got a little Snoopy in them,
True.
And so it's like, I think it's just one of those shows that like by the end of it, the audience just really makes you feel good. And that closing song, happiness, I couldn't help but almost tear up every night. Same. Because that song to me it's about happiness, and it's just,
Same.
I felt so happy being in that production. And so I think that getting to close the show every night with that song was so powerful.
Do you have a favorite song that we performed in the show, or that you performed in the show that was just yours? I'm just curious.
Okay, do I have a favorite song from that show? I think that for me, I actually loved the Valentine's Day scene. It's not a song.
Yeah, I remember.
I loved the Valentine's Day scene. Charlie doesn't get any Valentines. And it's just like, I don't know. It was just something that I just felt like I loved that scene. I don't know. It was something about it. So every night getting to do it. And, Charlie like sticks his head in the mailbox and, there's nothing in there. He didn't get any Valentines, and everybody else has Valentines. And, I don't know. It's just kind of, I don't know why that scene stuck out to me, but every night I loved performing that scene. And I also absolutely loved the baseball team song.
I did too. And
so,
I love that Valentine's Day scene because I got to kind of poke fun at you. That was my main, I feel like that was one of my main little sister moments in the show. That was really, really fun.
Yeah. Yeah. You weren't very nice to me in that scene.
No, oh my gosh, Sally sometimes in that show is like not nice to Charlie.
She's not.
But she, in the comics, like she totally loves Charlie. And
she loves Charlie in the show too. But,
I think so. Yeah.
It's like any annoying little brother or sister. Sometimes they just,
exactly.
Yeah. So being an older child in my family, I think that I can relate.
Yes, 100%. And that's a great experience, I think, that highlights some of your experiences on stage. But something that I don't know that everyone knows about you necessarily is that you're also really into directing and you love the directing role.
Yeah, so I haven't had tons of experience in the community theater with directing, but I really found a love for directing when I was in college. I took a directing class, and I was like, I don't know, 3 credits away from a theater minor in college, and so I took a directing class, and my theater professor, Jay Duffer, he directed a couple of the shows that I was in at Huntington University, and being in the directing class with him, it just really had an impact on me. And that's another example, I think, of like a mentor of sorts that Jay really, in a way, didn't necessarily intentionally mentor me, but just being in that professor role did. And so I think that I really found a love for being behind the scenes in a way that I didn't think I was going to. Initially, like growing up, I always thought I just want to be on stage, but I really found like, behind the scenes is really fun too. And so I was really thankful because when I came back to Peoria after living in Indiana for a while, I got involved at Pekin First Nazarene Church, and they gave me some opportunities to direct there. And so that's where I kind of got started with directing at church and directing at my elementary school. But I always direct the kids' Christmas program at my church. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Pekin First, it's a rather good sized church. I think 1,000 or more regular attendees, and there's quite a few kids that go there. So when we do our kids' Christmas program every year, it's a pretty big event because there's 60 or more kids involved in it. So we do a full hour long. It's got dialogue and acting and set pieces and props. And so, it's a full production as much as you can do in a church space. And then also I've been able to direct the Pekin Passion Play every year. And we have, 100 or more people involved by the time you count the choir and the actors on stage. And that always tells the story of Jesus and what Easter means for us. And so I've got some directing experience there. And then also through my time at CCT, I was able to be an assistant director with Kim Holden for Seussical. And that's another show that just means a lot to me. And so getting that chance to be assistant director, and then Peoria Players gave me the chance to direct Back to the 80s last summer, which was my first time that my name was up on the marquee. And, it just was something that was really meaningful to me. Growing up in Peoria community theater, Peoria Players is such a landmark for us. And, you can't really have CCT without PPT in a way, because, as long as I've been a part of community children's theater, it's always performed at Peoria Players. And so to me, Peoria Players, the building itself, means a lot to me, and of course the organization as well too. But to get to come and direct for Peoria Players Youth Theater and get to direct Back to the 80s last summer was just a dream role for me in a lot of ways, to get to be that director, and I just had so much fun with it.
So how did Back to the 80s come about to you? How did that opportunity come into your lap?
So I don't know exactly how it all started, but I do remember getting a call or a message, I think one day from Aaron, who was, I think, president of PPT at the time, and they had already selected the show. Actually, they'd already selected Back to the 80s, and they knew I had an interest in directing, and so they contacted me, I think, to see if I would be interested in directing Back to the 80s. And I had actually seen Back to the 80s that spring because Brian Blanks directed it for St. Vincent Middle School. And so I had actually went and seen that production at St. Vincent's, and I went into that show thinking I wasn't going to like it. Honestly, I'm going to tell you this some people don't really like jukebox musicals, and jukebox musicals are shows that put all these different pop songs into a musical, and sometimes they're good and sometimes they're terrible. And so there's I just kind of went into it thinking, I don't know anything about Back to the 80s, but I'm probably not going to like it because it's just going to be one of those other jukebox musicals, And I went to it at St. Vincent's and I saw it, and I had such a good time in the audience. I laughed the entire time. I just, it's got all those great 80s songs, and, who doesn't know and love them? You know what I mean? And so I really went into it thinking, I'm just going to go see it because, my mom has a free ticket and Brian's directing it. I might as well go see it. And I ended up absolutely loving it. And I went home that night and I'm looking up videos of it online. And so I didn't didn't intend to direct it at that moment, but I did have a real connection with the show and really loved it. And so a few months later, when I got the call and they had already picked the show and they wanted to know if I would direct it, I was like, yeah, for sure. Like, let me think about that. Yes. So so it kind of became that, and it just became such a great time for me.
That's amazing. And I think it seemed like throughout that experience, the kids really connected with you and looked up to you too, doing that show, and you had a really good experience.
Yeah, I did. And, I think that what I loved about doing that show was we had a pretty small cast of kids. And so we got to really bond as a cast. And we had, some people who hadn't music directed before. Austin Shaw had not really music directed before. And I got to give him an opportunity. That was a mission of mine, really, because being my first time directing and feeling like I also wanted to give other people a chance. And so Austin music directed and conducted the pit and was amazing. And we had Kaylee Knoll that did choreography, and she is a professional ballerina, but she came up with these really great, really cool 80s moves. And so I think that just the show and the kids that were in it was just so special to us that I think that all of us will really remember it for a long time. And again, it goes back to, like, I love doing stuff with youth, and so Peoria Players Youth Theater is ages 14 to 21, I think. And so it was a little bit different age than what CCT works with, but I just absolutely had a blast connecting with those kids and putting on a show, and the audiences loved it every night, which was made us feel really successful, because the audiences had such a fun time that several audience members came back time after time after time to come see it again, because they had such a fun time with it. You
had a group that came back a few times, right? Like
yeah,
3 or
we
4
did.
times at least? Yeah.
I think Chris Cochran, I think she came and saw the show, I don't know, 3 or 4 times, something like that. She can tell you for sure. But we had groups that would come back multiple times, because it was such a blast to be in the audience and to kind of feel like you're part of that show.
And I did get a chance to see that production, and it was so just pure fun, and it was so joyous. And I think that's really what came through most to me, watching the kids singing all of those fun 80s songs, is how fun.
Thanks.
How much fun
and
it was.
That's something I remember telling the kids kind of early on was, there's a lot of different types of musicals out there, and this is not a serious musical. Not everything in this musical totally lines up. Like, some of the continuity, it just wasn't there. You know what I mean? And not to criticize the people who wrote that show, but it was just meant to be a show that people would have a fun time watching. It wasn't meant to be a game changer for anybody. It was just meant to be a really fun show, and that's what it was. And so we just had the best time that we could with it, and got to dress up like you were all those 80s hair and makeup and costume. It's weird calling them costumes, because that was the style, you know what I mean? But It was a period piece,
100%. So when you're directing these shows and you have these onstage theater experiences, and we've really, I feel like, just scraped the surface on some of them too, you'll have to come back on the podcast, because this is going to be, we're not going to be able to get to everything for sure. But I want you to talk a little bit about what inspires you when you are directing or when you're performing and when you're taking on these challenges that are so rewarding. What inspires you?
Well, I think that's it. I think that the audience response is what's the reward at the end is why anybody in theater does it. We want to tell a story. We want to have audiences feel something, and getting that audience response and knowing that you were successful is the reward. And you're not always successful. I've been a part of some shows where I'm like, you have that, it's live theater, and it's even within a show, you might have 10 performances and 8 of them go really well and 2 of them just fall flat for whatever reason, and it's the same show every night, but for whatever reason something was a little off. But I mean, that reward is, I think, what inspires me to, or what keeps me coming back, I should say. But as far as what really inspires me, it's going to be the material, the different shows. I think that,
that's incredible.
For me, a show that a lot of people, it means a lot to them, is Les Mis, and I've done Les Mis twice.
Yes.
And I think that I would do Les Mis again. I mean, it's just a show that, the story of redemption and what, how that story is told to me is really important to me. And so that material is what inspires me to want to do that show. But sometimes it's other things. So it's not really one set thing that inspires me.
I think that speaks to how this material we're working with is so well written and so well constructed. And I think that's part of the reason why people come back to these stories time and time again. Like Les Mis, is that it's so well constructed and so well written that you don't really need much else to motivate you as a performer and sort of guide you through, because the material is so powerful.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And sometimes you find those shows where like it is so well written that like everything is there for you. You know, you're not coming up with anything on your own, and in a way, you know, because it's so much of it's there for you, and it's been so well done by so many other people that when you're doing that show, you're just trying to honor what everybody else has done before you,
yes, and
make it your own a little bit too. But you know, you really just want to continue to tell that story, because that story is important. But there's other times that, you know, next summer I'm directing Aladdin for Community Children's Theater, and you know, what inspires me to want to do Aladdin is my love for it as a child. You know, I grew up playing the VHS tape over and over and over again, and that story of, you know, finding the lamp and getting the wishes. I think everybody can relate to Aladdin's story,
right.
And I just absolutely loved the show as a kid, and I saw the show on Broadway when I was there in 2015, and so for me, like, that's what inspires me to want to do Aladdin, that show particularly, because I have such a connection to it as a kid, that's why I want to do that one.
That's incredible. You will have to come back on the podcast, because I feel like we've really covered quite a bit, but I think we've scraped the surface in talking about your experiences.
Because we didn't even talk about awesome. Hamilton, Sarah.
Well, and no, we didn't. And that brings me to kind of this rapid fire game I want to play.
Oh, okay.
At the end of the podcast. I'm ready. And then we'll do kind of our final question and wrap up. But this rapid fire game is going to kind of be mostly just quick responses to questions I'm going to throw at you.
No pressure.
Some of them might be theater related. Some of them might not be.
Okay.
And one of them is going to require you to come up with a response in 10 words or less. So
oh, no.
We're going to play this game. It's okay. I'm so excited to hear your responses.
Okay.
And I'm sure Hamilton will come up at some point in this rapid fire game. So first rapid fire question. Explain what theater means to you in 10 words or less.
Oh, you had to start with the hard one?
I did.
Oh. Theater is, I'm thinking wisely. Theater is about people telling other people's stories to audiences.
That's incredible. That was great. That was perfect. I love it. Okay, here are the other rapid fire questions coming at you. These won't be as hard, I promise.
Okay.
Although you might have to make some decisions here.
Okay, I'm ready.
You might have to pick some favorites.
I'm impulsive, so that's okay.
All right. Favorite musical?
The Last 5 Years.
Really? I know you very well, and I know your tastes, but that great choice. I'm surprised that that's what it was, but
I mean, gun to my head, that's what I would say, but I think I would like to pick 5.
Well, exactly, and I'm sure Hamilton will be one of those. Favorite Broadway composer?
Jason Robert Brown.
Okay, you're sticking with the Jason Robert Brown. Jason Robert Brown wrote The Last 5 Years for listeners who don't know.
The man wrote Bridges of Madison County.
I know.
He wrote Parade, Honeymoon in Vegas. Okay.
We'll have to talk about Honeymoon in Vegas the next time you're on the pod. Okay, favorite food?
Popcorn.
Obviously, that's a great choice.
Yeah.
Favorite TV show?
Survivor.
That's right. I was like...
Sorry, I had to think, because I'm like, oh, I don't know, because there's so many categories.
For listeners who can't see him, he made me nervous because he hesitated for a second. I was sure that it was going to be Survivor.
Well, I was thinking maybe Game of Thrones.
Oh, Game of Thrones is also a solid choice.
But you can't compare those two.
No, they're so different. They're very, very different. But, yeah. I mean, Survivor has got to be up there for you.
Because, I'm all about storytelling. Game of Thrones, man, tell a story. Like, wow. Okay.
Favorite Broadway actor or actress?
Okay, I want to go with Laura Osnes.
Laura Osnes is a great choice. Okay, so since you picked an actress, do you have a favorite theater actor?
Do I have a favorite theater actor? I think Norm Lewis.
Oh,
I really like Norm Lewis.
I'm surprised. I thought you might say Norbert Leo Butz.
Well, he crossed my mind, but I think ultimately everything, Norm Lewis, oh, I just love him.
That's amazing. Place you want to travel and have not had a chance to yet?
Fiji.
You would want to go to Fiji. That's where they shoot Survivor, for listeners that don't know. Favorite song from a Broadway musical?
Okay, the song that I could listen to anytime,
That's
anywhere.
Even a better way
I mean,
to put
because
it,
it's hard
yeah.
to say put favorite song, because but the song that no matter what that I could just listen to anytime, anywhere comes from the last 5 years, which is I think why ultimately I said that was my favorite musical. But I love the song "If I Didn't Believe in You."
I love that song too. It's one of the most genius songs in that show. Great choice.
Thank you.
Perfect. Well, thanks for playing the rapid fire
I want more questions
game.
like that.
That was amazing. Well, next time you come on the pod, we can do some more. But that
Okay.
kind of gives some quick insight into some of your favorites. And then really briefly, too, you mentioned Aladdin Jr., which
Yeah.
you are directing next summer for CCT. So that's your next upcoming project. So talk to listeners a little bit about when that's going to happen and what that will look like.
Yeah, so next summer for Community Children's Theater, pending things with the virus, planning to direct Aladdin in July, and we haven't set audition dates yet, but it should be sometime in April probably, and my good friend Nicole Faree is going to be choreographer and music director. She's going to do 2 roles, but she's amazing, so you guys are going to all love her if you don't know her. And I actually met her doing Hairspray in 2012 with Pam at the tent, so kind of full circle here. But so Aladdin's happening next summer, and I'm so excited. I'm looking for kids who want to come be part of a show, whether or not they've been in part of a show before or not. That's what I'm looking for. And I'm really, I don't want you to think about Aladdin the way you've seen it in the movies, because I'm not looking for any specific look for any characters. And I think that's what I want people to know is like, even some roles, I don't really even care the gender for some of them. So like, I just want kids who want to come and tell a good story and be part of something. And that's what I want. That's what I want to do with Aladdin. I think Aladdin it's set in Agrabah, which is just this made up place, and so we're going to make it our own, and that's what we're going to it's traditionally done like Middle Eastern, and I don't want to like stray too far away from that, but we don't have tons of Middle Eastern people here in Peoria auditioning, and so we're going to make Agrabah our own. It's going to be what we make it.
And I also want to give a quick plug before next summer. Hopefully by the time this podcast is up and you can listen to it, we will be in the thick of Big Fish rehearsals.
That's right.
So Community Children's Theater is working on Big Fish this winter. So Willis and I are both working on that production. That will be up in December at Peoria Players Theater with all COVID safety precautions in place. And we are planning on selling live stream tickets to the public.
That's right. So stay tuned. Go to cctpeoria.org or follow us on our social media at cctpeoria.
Yes.
So you can get all that information because Big Fish is another one that it's a really powerful show, and I just love the story. It's a father-son story, and it's just really amazing. And so if those of you who don't know, it's just it's got Norbert Leo Butz in it on the original Broadway cast, which I almost picked him, but I picked Norm Lewis earlier. But it's just a really amazing story, and I love the music, I love the story, and I love that we're going to be doing it with kids. And I love that we're going to try out this whole live streaming thing because, we can only have so many people in person in the audience. And so I'm excited for the challenge of producing a live stream musical. And so I hope everybody tunes in and that we support the kids who want to come do the show.
We plan to do this production safely with all COVID-19 measures and precautions in place. So we're really excited to hopefully bring back some live theater to the community, all things hopefully panning out the way we hope they will. So
that's right.
By the time you listen to this, hopefully we will be in the thick of rehearsals for that. So, and Willis, I just thought of one more thing that I wanted to ask that probably could have been another rapid fire question. Do you have any dream projects that you want to work on that you haven't had a chance?
You know I do, Sarah. You know I do.
I know you do.
I really, a dream project that I want to direct is Once Upon a Mattress.
Yes, you do.
I absolutely love the musical Once Upon a Mattress. I think it's hilarious. And, Carol Burnett was in it on Broadway and in the movie version in 2 different roles. But, it's just one of those shows that I think is kind of underappreciated. I mean, I'm sure some high schools do it, but, it hasn't been done much. And so it's a show that I really love and want to direct because it's got great songs, great dancing opportunities, and just as a fun show. So that's a show I really want to direct. And then as far as like a dream role for me to play on stage, I'll share that with you all right now. I really want to be Shrek one day. Shrek is a dream role for me, and Horton and Seussical. I can't pick one.
I think all those experiences I hope will come to pass for your future at some point. So Willis, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I think this has been so much fun to talk with you, and I kind of know you very well, and I know a lot of these theater experiences you've had, but it's great to hear you articulate kind of why this matters and how it can impact, especially children, but impact the community as a whole. And I'm really excited to work with you on future productions and projects. But the last question I want to pose to all my guests that come on the podcast, in the spirit of talking about the Peoria theater community, is why does Peoria theater matter to you?
Peoria theater to me is, it's like a home, you know what I mean? And so that's what why it matters to me is it's a place where, like, no matter what no matter what I have going on in my life, like, I can be part of a show and be part of a community. And it's, I get to work with people from all over and make new friends all the time. And so that's, the community aspect of it is why it's important to me. But I also think that we're very fortunate in Peoria to have a community theater that we like the way we do. I lived in the Fort Wayne, Indiana area for a little bit of time after college, and they, as far as I know, I mean, I didn't live there that long, but they only have like one community theater, and I don't know how well supported it is, but we are so lucky here in Peoria to have Peoria Players and Cornstalk in Peoria, and then Eastside even, across the river, and then things for kids to do as well, like Community Children's Theater, Cornstalk for Kids, and all these other opportunities that they have. So I think we just don't realize, I think, in Peoria how much we have and what we have available. And I think that it is, for me, that's why I love it, is because it's a place for all of us to get to be creative and get to be together and to tell a story and make friends and have fun.
I think that speaks so much to the magic of the Peoria theater community. And I think that it matters so much that we have these opportunities as people living in a smaller central Illinois town. Yeah. And we're able to impact people.
And we give the audience an escape too. And I think that's something I didn't mention, but I love being an audience member because sometimes I need an escape and I need to go see a show where I don't think about the troubles of the world or the election or, whatever. And I can just sit and just not think about my life for 2.5 hours, right, and get to see something that moves me in whatever way it does, and that's what I love as an audience member, and I'm so glad that we have that to provide for audience members here too.
That's incredible. Well, thank you so much, Willis, for coming on the podcast. It was so great to talk to you, and hope to have you back soon.
Oh, anytime. Let me know.
Thanks for listening to Peoria Theater People. This podcast is produced by me, Sarah Hall, and the sound editor is Hunter Goodhart.